Yeah, thank you for coming. And yeah, I was like literally finishing slides like 5 minutes before because like I just wanted to put like really different things together. So I hope that like we can keep the whole thing very conversational. And since we're also a very small group, like if you have any questions, just like stop me. And of course, we can have a discussion and plan like maybe 20 minutes for the presentation. Then we have like lots of time afterwards. But if you feel like something's not making sense, please just stop me and ask me questions. So yeah, my name is Nickhil, and I'm based in the UK, and one of the main themes of my PhD is also intersectionality. Show of hands, have you heard of this concept before? No. Okay, so we'll get into this in some way. So essentially, I'll tell you a little bit about the context of my PhD work. When I started my PhD, luckily I was like one of these research PhDs where a lot of the goals were not defined. They wanted me to do something with smart technologies, and they wanted me to do something with social justice. And I started with this like very science and technology studies critique of smart society as a whole. So as you can see, you've probably heard of this term smart a lot, especially in India. We have the smart cities mission. But like all over the world, people don't really know what exactly smart means. But like very broadly, it means having some form of internet / communication technologies embedded in everything that we do, from healthcare to waste management to infrastructure to workplaces, mobility everywhere. And of course, now this discussion is moving ahead from the internet to also artificial intelligence, because that's the new thing. So initially, this is where I started. I did a lot of my readings on this, and I tried to situate myself as sort of someone who's criticizing this from a social justice perspective. And I'll come to that in just a little bit. And my PhD is funded by the European Union, and yeah, it's part of the MSCA Marie Curie training pathways that they have, basically. Right, and also when I started the PhD, I became really interested in like this bit, so like the smart grid bit of it, smart energy. I'll tell you a little bit about it in just a bit. And because my background is in energy engineering, I was really interested in that bit. And so I did a little bit of research on what's already out there. And you've probably already heard of just transitions. So show of hands if you've heard of just transitions. Yeah. Maybe this is more for people from the environmental studies background. So basically there's a whole bunch of literature, as you can see, which has been around for a very long time. And it kind of started with this idea that when we have big infrastructure projects in society which are moving away from coal, we need to make sure we create jobs for coal miners who've lost their jobs. And that just energy transitions framework has been applied to any and every energy transition that's out there. And it's worked really well in some aspects. Like, for example, it's like exposed the negative impacts of some proposed new solutions. It also works really well. The current framework works really well within like techno-material aspects, so it kind of tells you what kind of hard material is being used in these infrastructure projects. It's really good with economic inequalities as well to sort of bring those out. And it's really good at studying new projects. That's also something it does really, really well. And it's really effective in bringing about incremental changes. So like in Europe, for example, a lot of the solar and wind projects have become more equitable to everyone in society because of this framework. However, there's a growing body of literature which is starting to critique this framework quite a lot, both in Europe, where it originates, but also in like India and Brazil, in Mexico, where they started to talk about and situate this energy transition at like a global scale, and they talk about, okay, but when we talk about just energy transitions, we need to talk about power. Like there's no way we can talk about all of this without actually talking about how powerful actors dominate these transitions, how their interests are influencing these transitions, and of course, geopolitically, like tensions between the global north and the global south. There's also an under-emphasis on extractivism, like we talk a lot about electric vehicles, but we don't talk about like where the minerals that are extracted that go into these batteries are coming from. There's no confrontation with like logics like capitalism. That's also like missing. Also, diverse social categories such as race, gender, sexuality, abilities, they all remain on the margins still. And it tends to be retrospective. So it kind of like looks at new technologies that are coming and it tries, once they've already interacted with society, it makes an analysis of it, but it's not really full or normative yet. So basically this was the context in which I started my PhD. And then I was lucky because I got to work with this organization called Citizens Advice. They're a very unique organization that's based in the UK. So how they work is they're funded by the UK government, but they are independent. So there's like every little town in the UK has a local citizens advice. And they basically give advice to citizens. That's what they do, it's in their name. So if you have a problem with not being able to pay your bills, your energy is too expensive, your visa is taking too long, your passport's taking too long, you can't afford food, whatever the problem is, you walk into the local citizens advice and they give you advice. Now, all of these local citizens advice, they communicate with the main citizens advice, which is based in London. So that's the context. So I got to work with them. And that was during this crisis. And you've all heard of the crisis in Europe after the war broke out in Ukraine, right? So there was a huge cost of living crisis. Initially an energy crisis, which kind of led to, like in the UK, the price of energy tripled basically after the war broke out. And that led to a huge crisis, a cost of living crisis. So citizens advice are doing this dashboard for the first time, which any of you can access as well. And they started looking at how severe this crisis is. So over here you can see the number of people that they've helped, how it's like drastically gone up from 2014 to 2023. And there's different topics that you can look at as well. And since I'm focusing on energy, here I'm looking at energy debt. So people who got into debt because they couldn't pay bills, electricity bills, gas bills, and so on. As I was saying earlier, like it started with an yes.
How does what the distribution looks like if you look at men and women separately?
Yes, we'll come to that. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes. Yeah.
What do you mean by how they help? Like by paying for the debt or?
No, they don't pay anything themselves. They give them advice. So they tell them, hey, have you tried this? Have you looked at this government support scheme? So basically, they have
just
advices. Information, yeah, exactly. And right, so as you can see over here, like green here is like people's energy debts. That's one up. But I also want to show this graph that there's also like all our prices are linked. Yes.
And so sorry, the previous one.
Yeah.
I mean, this is we don't really know why that is happening. Right?
Yeah.
This we are just reading into it and saying it's
Yes.
because of the energy crisis.
Yes.
But really, it could just be greater awareness. So we don't actually, we don't really know all of the factors that might go into increasing the trend in the last 3 years, right?
Yeah, but I think like more or less it is because like you can see that there's like if you look at the data historically as well, there's like slight variations, but this spike after the war which broke out in 2022 is quite obvious. There's that relationship for sure. So I think that they've started releasing this data afterwards as well. But they are also doing this for the first time, so this data is also like being more detailed and capturing more insights. Right, and also what I want to show with this graph is there's a link between energy and other issues, right? So there's also the number of people who they had to refer to food banks has also gone up. That's the purple bit that you see. That's also gone up drastically. So people couldn't afford energy and they had to often choose between energy and food, for example. And yeah, this is the number of people that they've helped with energy efficiency advice, right? So if prices are too high, people basically call them and tell them, hey, should I get my house insulated? Should I get my windows double glazed so they are warmer? So what kind of energy efficiency measures should I take? And that's also drastically gone up. This is from January 2019 to January 2024. So the number of people that they've helped just giving energy efficiency advice has also gone up. But what I want to show is that they've started disaggregating this data, right? So they started looking at the same graph from before, but they started looking at, for example, ethnicity. And they started looking at who is actually affected. And there's definitely very interesting insights here. So for example, Black African, Caribbean, and Black British households were the ones that were disproportionately affected by this crisis because they were the ones who reached out to them most. And then we have other ethnic groups, white households, and then we have Asian British households that were kind of least affected by this crisis. But then they also have like other markers like disability, their household type, housing tenure, gender, income, lots of different things. So we can look at one more. So for example, if you look at housing tenure, those that are living in social housing that's provided by the state and they don't own this place but their tenants, they were the ones who were struggling most with this crisis.
I'm not sure how to interpret the graphs because how can you tell that some section,
Yeah.
like the blacks or the Asians, they were helped the most because they knew that this type of help existed, or maybe they were affected the most by this increasing.
So they're just simply capturing like certain socio-economic factors when someone comes to them for help. So they basically record all of this information. So every time they help someone, they have the client information. So they just basically take the data there. But I'm not an
So
expert on
it
how
doesn't
they
mean that they were coming because they were affected the most.
I mean, what else could be an explanation?
So is it a percentage or the actual number of,
This is the actual number.
then probably you have to normalize it with the total population, right? So it is possible that their population in general is so high.
No, it's not. So it's like disproportionate because they are the minority in many cases. So that's
How about people losing jobs during COVID and the pandemic? Because this also overlaps with
Yeah.
the first two lockdowns.
there's definitely links to that as well. Like there's definitely links to what happened during COVID because that was just like they were just recovering from COVID and then this other crisis hit as well. But essentially, like what I want to show from these graphs is basically this. Like what I'm building up to is what I want to show from this is like this data. The argument that's coming in my thesis is that first of all we have complex and co-constituting inequalities. There's like the type of housing that people live in, their ethnicity, the kind of gender they are, kind of income bracket they are. They're all complex and they co-constitute each other. So the inequalities are complex, but also we have these intersecting global crises. Because in this example, we just saw like the effect of people not being able to pay for their energy on their ability to afford food. But there's like the climate justice movement has pointed out that there are other interconnections as well. It's not just climate justice; it's more holistic. And so, like from that bit, so in that background, my PhD is exploring like energy flexibility and smart energy. And yeah, I guess, have you heard of energy flexibility, smart energy before? No. Okay, so basically the idea is that we as energy consumers, we in this smart energy future, we have the capacity to basically influence both energy production and energy consumption. And this is enabled by like a bunch of different technologies, which basically are able to communicate with the grid. They're all again internet enabled. So there's that link once again. And so there was this crisis going on in the UK where everyone was talking about how people are not able to afford energy. And simultaneously, added to this, there was this push for smart energy. Before I get into like what happened in terms of policy, there also, so if you want to, so there's this like really grand vision that they have of like what a smart energy system looks like. But it's like a vision, it's not been realized yet. But if it has to be realized, there's like one basic element of technology that we need, and that's a smart meter. So a smart meter is really simple. So it basically records your energy consumption data in your household at 30-minute intervals. And it gives you this data as an energy consumer, but it also gives whoever is supplying your energy the same data over the internet. That's the most basic thing. And then the main thing is that it gives households the capacity to participate in the flexibility market. And this is where a little bit of economics comes in. Because when there's an excessive amount of renewable energy in the system, so if there's too much wind, too much solar, it has to be utilized immediately because it can't be stored for a very long time. And so what energy companies want to do is they want to incentivize people to start using energy at this time because they can, it's a win-win because for them there's no pressure to store this energy, it doesn't harm their infrastructure, and for the households, they can pay a very cheap price, provided they are able to flex their demand. So instead of washing their load today, the energy company tells through the smart meter, hey, shift some of your load to tomorrow because we anticipate high amounts of wind, there's going to be excess supply, and so the price is going to be cheap. So that's the whole concept. Yeah.
This has not been done yet, right? Just given the smoke meters.
It has started. It has started. So in the UK, there've been like 10 flexibility trials, which have already been done since 2017.
Because when I was there, I never got any such information.
Yeah.
The main question I have is,
Yeah.
as you said, these renewable sources
Yeah.
are variable.
Yeah.
But then, can't the energy companies, can't they manipulate the coal-based power production based on the input from renewables?
Yeah, so there are no coal power plants in the UK.
No, what I ask is, if you
Yeah.
expect more wind,
Yeah.
then why can't you reduce the amount of coal production? Why do you have to ask the consumers to increase their utility bill?
Yeah, because in a fossil-free energy mix, like now we're really getting into the technical of energy bit. So I like give a very quick answer. But the answer is that if you want to imagine a fully renewable system, then for example you're not going to have coal, you're going to have nuclear. You can use nuclear, you can regulate it a little bit. But then the other fixed load, the only other option is gas. So if you want to have a fully regulated, fully fossil-free system, there's going to be a lot of variability.
No, I'm not asking about fossil-free system.
Yeah.
We know that there is a higher availability of renewable sources.
Yeah.
Why can't you reduce the amount of production from the non-renewable one during that time?
Yeah.
Because essentially what you are telling is they will give information for the users.
Yes, but there's this concept of base load, so you need to have a minimum amount of base load. So for example, industries and things like that, they need basic amount of energy at all times. And this you can't offer from like variable sources of energy, and they have to be fixed. And right now, the only four technologies we have are hydro, nuclear, gas, and coal. And so if there's no gas and coal, and in the UK they also want to phase out nuclear, so then the only option they have is hydro, which means they want to transition to a system which has mostly variable renewable energy systems. So that's why this is a policy. Yeah.
Actually, there is another reason, which is that depending on how fast your wind or solar changes, if there's a cloud that comes in, suddenly there's a problem and so on. Most fossil fuel power plants have a certain ramp, so you can't exceed.
Yeah.
So the rate at which you ramp down or ramp up output is limited. For technical reasons, you should exceed that. It's just depending on the specifications of that particular power. So if the rate of change in solar or wind is very high, you may not be able to ramp up your fossil fuel power.
You have to ramp down.
Either way, there is a certain maximum rate at which you can ramp up or ramp. So there is also a technical reason.
Yeah. Right. So I'm gonna sort of skip through the rest of it because I think I don't want to get involved in the technical bits. I want to make a bigger point. Anyways, there's like lots of benefits of a smart meter, right? That's what's been projected. And what we can see is in terms of policy, right? So if you look at the researchers on policy, the UK government has spent more than £100 million since 2016 only on advertisements of smart meters, right? So they want everybody to have a smart meter, and they had an aim to cover all households and small businesses by 2020, right? And this is in a country which has a very, very deep inequality with its energy system, which we saw during the energy crisis, that a lot of people, 1 in 4 households were not able to heat their homes adequately. Yet there was a huge amount of spending on technology which still hasn't completely proven its benefits, right? And also the other, like if you look away from the UK, in the EU, it's the same. In 2020, it was in 2016, sorry, it was mandated that at least 80% of electricity meters need to be replaced with smart meters by 2020. And it was estimated that the energy consumption would go down by 9%. So that's the other big push why they wanted everybody to have these smart meters, because they tell you when you're consuming too much energy, and so you change your behavior. So they estimated that energy consumption would go down by up to 9%. But yeah, both the EU and the UK missed the targets, and that's primarily because of COVID, but also because of a lot of other factors. They're both basically around halfway through, and Also, the energy consumption decrease potential has not been proven. A recent study put it at less than 4%, so it's not anywhere near 9%. And at the same time, like in my research, I've also looked at like what's actually been the impact of the smart meters that have been like distributed so far. So what stakeholders are saying right now is that low-income households have not been able to utilize any of the cost-saving benefits that are associated with the smart meter rollouts. And crucial energy consumption data of low-income households, which would have helped energy advice, has been missing because oftentimes energy advisors require data on how their consumption patterns are, but this data is missing because they haven't had access.
Is the data from these meters voluntary or government kind of comes up with a random sample and it's mandated on those?
It's voluntary. It's voluntary. It's often through your energy company. They will basically send out an email and say, hey, when can I come and talk to you about the smart meter? So it's voluntary.
And is it costly to replace your old meter with the smart?
So the thing is, you actually don't pay anything technically. You just pay a really, really small amount every month on your bill. So you actually, and it's not very expensive. You pay for maybe 2 or 3 years, and you pay maybe less than 1% of your energy bill. Right, and also, so there's low-income households on one side. There's also elderly households who are very, very reluctant, who don't want to engage with these technologies. So they haven't really gotten access to smart meters as much as everybody else. And there are also households that have special medical needs. So like there are households that, for example, require a ventilator all the time. And they're like, I don't want to participate in flexibility because the moment they hear flexibility, they are a bit taken aback because, yeah, they feel like there are certain devices in their house that need to be plugged in all the time. And we've also seen in certain cases, which now the government has banned, so when people were not able to afford their energy and they had a smart meter, what the energy companies did was they remotely switched their mode of payment to prepayment, which means that they had to charge their meter online. And a lot of people didn't charge their meter online and they were basically disconnected. So we also saw that like a lot of companies were like misusing the power they had with these smart meters. And on the other side, who benefited the most is mostly, so first of all, the benefits have mostly been in terms of cost, and they've been in terms of additional knowledge, so additional knowledge of the electricity system. And the ones who had mostly economic benefits have been upper income households who have like high flexibility already because they have like electric vehicles, for example, which they can charge at times when the energy prices are very low. And in terms of additional knowledge, a lot of distribution companies that basically can have access to smart meter data and energy producers, they've benefited a lot from this information on how this data benefits or could help them like balance supply and demand. And also urban households, they tend to participate a lot more in these flexibility trials, which you were asking about, and they also find it easier to flex their demand. And also we found that there's no analysis on other socioeconomic indicators. So we spoke about low income, we spoke about elderly, we spoke about switching. But there's no data about ethnicity, kind of housing, level of English that the household has, immigration status, etc., etc., etc. So there's lots of like knowledge gaps. And we also found that there's like an exclusionary design of the market services. So a lot of energy companies, they argue that this is how the market works, like a lot of low-income households or other kinds of households, they wouldn't want to participate in energy flexibility anyway, like in the market design. So we're going to start with the upper-income households because they are more willing, and once they participate in these trials, we can have a trickle-down effect and then everybody can benefit. So that's basically kind of the story so far. And basically so like my PhD was like, it kind of like stopped here, like the first bit, and then there was this other bit which was coming from intersectionality, which is what I've been using in my research. So I've been using in my research, yeah.
So the information that you show, this is
Yeah.
based on your research or this already exists?
This bit.
Yeah.
It's a bit of both. So I published an article. So a lot of it is based on like literature review, like things that have already been written about the smart meter rollouts. And in addition to that, I did like 12 interviews with like energy companies, with like policymakers, with advice
But
groups.
not with people with the.
No, not directly. So some of the organizations that I like organizations that give advice or make policies, they work directly with households. So I did yeah. Right. So before I tell you about like what I did with intersectionality, I would just tell you a little bit about what intersectionality is. I won't get too much into the details. So basically, intersectionality is a concept that was coined in 1989, and it was by Kimberly Crenshaw. And now it's like buzzword, and everybody's talking about it. But essentially, it came from Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a legal scholar, and it came about because she noticed the case of this person called Emma, and Emma was an African American woman, and she went to a court in Chicago and she said, I would actually like to have a double discrimination case against this company, which is not hiring me because I'm a woman and because I'm black. So she wanted a double discrimination charge, not just a discrimination charge. And yeah, this charge or this claim was dismissed by the court. And Kimberly Crenshaw did a little bit of investigation, and she found that, yeah, the Chicago court said, we are dismissing your legal proceedings against this company because they do hire women and they do hire black. So there's no case for discrimination. And Kimberly Crenshaw basically found out that that was actually true what the court was saying, but the company hired mostly black men because they were a company that was doing like wooden blocks, so they associated black men who have more physical prowess, so they hired mostly black men, and they hired mostly white women for front-end admin jobs. So even though the claim that the company hired just black people and hired women was true, there was some nuance there which Kimberly Crenshaw highlighted. And what she said was, black women experience a very unique kind of inequality, which kind of is different from what black men experience and what white women experience. And it's because they have this intersection of both race and gender. And she said we can't just think of intersectionality as, race and gender separately, but we need to kind of think of it intertwined. So we need to think of racialized sexism and gender racism. So that's kind of like how intersectionality started, but it's been there much, much before that. People have noticed these intersections between different kinds of inequalities, much before Frances Harper, when she was at a convention for the right for women to vote in New York City, she, as one of the few black women, she noticed that the white women all talked about sex and gender, and they didn't really talk about race. So she has already highlighted this long row. There's also an example of Brazil. In the interest of time, I'll talk about the example of India. So Savitribai Phule, she is a feminist, probably heard of her. So she spoke about, for example, caste, and she said that there was no, or she believed that there would be no women's empowerment without talking about caste. So for her, that was as important as talking about gender, even though she was herself a feminist, right? So this idea that all of these inequalities work together in intersecting ways has been there for a very, very long time. So that's kind of like the main philosophy of intersectionality. And since then, there's been like many, many different applications of intersectionality. But in my PhD, what I'm using it as is I'm using it as this space. So basically, this reflective space where people can really, really think in a transformative manner. And how intersectionality does this, I can tell you in just a little bit. But basically, what I try to create with my PhD is I try to create a space where some of the energy practitioners in the UK work with these households, work with the smart energy transition, who think about injustices in an intersectional way. How I did this is through some case studies. So essentially, so yeah, I'll just give you a little bit of I'll talk about my case studies, which are here in just a bit. But before the case studies, I did like a lot of other work. So I did like mapping. So I looked at how much intersectionality was being talked about in the smart transition. And then because I wanted to do these workshops where we could talk about injustices through an intersectional perspective, I did some practice workshops. And then finally I did some case studies. And in these case studies, there were like 3 organizations that were involved. So there was one organization that was working with policy research and advocacy, and they were interested in working with me because they had basically done some work on smart and fair. So they had already shown like what are the injustices within the flexibility market that's being developed in the UK, but they had found that they wanted to engage with the concept of justice in a more profound way. So they were interested. They were working with advocacy, policy research. There was a social enterprise based in Oxford, and they were interested in working with intersectionality because they felt that certain socio-demographic groups in their rural region were hard to reach, as they called it. So they wanted to see how they could reach them. And I think the third and perhaps the most interesting case for me was of a distribution network operator, a really big one. So a distribution network operator in the UK energy market is basically the companies that control all the infrastructure that supplies energy, so all the wires and cables and things like that. So they were really interested because they have discovered that there is a business case in understanding why certain households are less likely to engage with smart technologies, because for them there's a direct connection with profits. So they were really interested in understanding how different markers of identities influence certain people's engagement with energy technologies, essentially. And yeah, so like what happened in the case studies? So the case studies were each spread out over 6 weeks. So we started with exploring certain concepts from intersectionality, which I'll tell you about in just a bit. So firstly, we kind of unpack all the work that they're already doing with households who are struggling to engage with smart meters and energy flexibility in general. Then we spoke about intersectionality, what they already knew, and we spoke about some things I'll tell you in just a bit. And then we used a tool because there was a lot of interest in using a tool which would help them understand intersectionality in a more pragmatic way. And then after the first workshop, I kind of gave them a template, and this was a self-reflection template, so they could fill it out. And they did this over 4 weeks. And while they were doing this, I did some interviews with them to see how their experience was in filling out this template. And then lastly, we ended up with like a final workshop where we kind of reflected on the whole process, and we came up with some guidelines how they could use intersectionality in their practice, basically. Yeah.
Please give examples of these steps. Like for
Yeah.
example,
Yeah.
unpacking marginalization. So what kind of discussions happen? What kind
Yeah.
of so you said they helped households with understanding the technology. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and then the last one where you create guidelines and
Yeah.
what to apply intersectionality in practice. So like what
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah, I'll come to that in just a bit. So basically what we did in this explore bit is, so when we talk about unpacking marginalization, we basically just unpack people's experiences, like why certain people are experiencing difficulties in engaging with smart energy, basically. So there was, things like language, there was things like, the same usual suspects which I was telling you about earlier, like people not having enough understanding of how energy flexibility works, people being tenants, so not really being sure about whether they can allow an energy company to come and change their meters without getting permission from their landlords and so on. So there was a bunch of different factors that we looked at. But what we looked at in the explore phase was we looked at these metaphors. They were kind of like this was what guided our conversation, and this comes from intersectionality and feminist philosophy, where basically we looked at 4 taglines, right? And the ones that you see in brackets are more like the academic version of what this stands for. But what we looked at, because they were mostly practitioners, we tried to look at it in a more non-academic way. So for example, the first one is we kind of question their epistemologies of not just them as an organization, but also like of the whole energy system. I'll come to that in just a bit. So we asked ourselves the question, if we assume something about the energy system, where is this knowledge coming from? So we were critical about knowledge. Whose knowledge is it anyway? The second one is about ontologies, about identity, is about being, about experience. So we basically looked at how we can challenge the universal subject, how we can look at nuances between, so when we talk about gender, how are there nuances between gender, how are experiences of Muslim women, how are experiences of trans women different from experiences of cis white women, for example. We spoke about that. we spoke about solidarity, about sameness, so like acknowledging differences between different households, but also simultaneous similarities. And then finally, the fourth one was a critique of the system itself. So we basically looked at historical ways in which society has been unjust towards certain groups, and we tried to basically reimagine radical futures. So what we used as a metaphor was new model, same old one. So we tried to question what is it that we are thinking is new. In this case, we talked about like smart energy technologies, energy flexibility. Yeah, it's new, but what within it is the same old wine? What injustices are being carried forward? So we basically asked each other these questions in conversations, and we also worked with this tool. So basically, this tool it's quite simple. It has this like axis of domination, which is in the center, and anything above this is basically a privilege, and anything below is a penalty. So it's really, really simple in that sense. And basically, you can plot different axes. So for example, if you look at this one, it's class. So here we have working class, poor, and over here we have upper and upper middle class. So we have different identities which we applied to certain cases of households that they were. And the approach, why we used this approach was because we wanted to challenge like simplistic notions of advantage and disadvantage. We didn't want to think of like, if someone is going somewhere, it's definitely a disadvantage. We want to challenge this. We want to make it more open and broad. And we also wanted to see how these different like axes actually connect to each other. So I'll show you an example of it just to get the question.
I'm still not getting where is this injustice coming from? It's a voluntary decision. Maybe some household with some specific characteristics.
Yes.
They're deciding voluntarily not to engage with this smart meter or whatever. So why is this? Where is this injustice? It's it's not like they're being denied this specific technology because of their social demographics or whatever.
Yes, but in a way they are being denied because when flexibility trials are run, everybody can participate in it, right? It's open and it's voluntary. So we also challenge this notion. When something is voluntary, a lot of times the households that are already struggling, they're struggling with their children not being able to go to school, they're struggling with making sure that there's a healthcare worker coming in, plugging in healthcare devices. They will not have voluntary access to a flexibility trial program because they're going to be like, I have a lot of other things to worry about. Why should I care about this? Fair enough, that's a voluntary decision. But the whole idea of this research is to basically inform the people who make these flexibility trials to see how they can make it more inclusive, how they can make it more approachable, so that even people who are struggling with other things can participate in these trials. Because the way this energy flexibility market is going to be designed is going to carry characteristics of the people who have participated in these flexibility trials. They're called flexibility trials because they are informing the design, the conscious design of what the market's going to look like in 10 years from now. So the real concern is that if we miss out certain demographics, certain households right now, in the future, they're going to be left out. And that's kind of happened before in many other different cases as well. So that's the injustice then. So the idea is not just about something being voluntary. Of course, it should be voluntary and people should always have the right to opt out. That's the logic. But then how can the approach, how can the outreach to households become more inclusive so that more people can participate? Does that make sense?
Sort of. So once you have all this information, this could go into some sort of ad engine or something to reach more people. That's all you're going to do?
It could go, it could go into advertising campaigns, it could go into policy making, it could go into, it could feed into like how companies, which areas in the UK the companies decide to put their money in. Like right now, they, for example, focus a lot on urban areas, and that's because they know that there's going to be challenges in the semi-urban rural areas. So like how can they actually also reach those areas? And so there's benefits for everybody, not just for the households that are like. So we also explored that a little bit, how this can be done a little bit more broadly. I'll tell you a little bit about this as well. So you can see this. These are some pictures from the workshop. So I'm not going to get too much into details, but as you can see, when we did this, the Web of Identities bit, I just kind of gave them a blank web, I just gave them privileges on top, penalties below. We looked at 3 different cases of households, which were sort of based on real households that they deal with. And they basically read these cases, discussed and plotted different household characteristics. And then, and then the question was, how do these identities intersect to influence this household's capacity to participate in energy flexibility? As you can see, it was not very straightforward. They were not sure, for example, there were some things that came out. We were not sure about how ethnicity could influence somebody's energy use. So there were lots of question marks there. They just said, we don't know, we need to do this research. So for example, there was this one case where there was a child in the house who was neurodivergent, and this child would basically get really easily overwhelmed by stimuli. So this person, they needed like a very special amount, like a very special room in the house which had like less stimulus. They really liked video games, and so there was a question of like, is this person's neurodivergence, is it a penalty or a privilege? And we discussed that it could be thought of as a penalty because they have a constant load. They need to always run their computers. They need to always be in this space, so they can't really flex their energy demand. But on the other side, we thought maybe it's also possible that, because it's a flexibility market, there's price variations and you need to respond to these price variations. We thought that it is possible to gamify this. And then this person who's really interested in video games, who's really, because of their condition, because of their neurodivergence, they could actually participate in this system. So we realized that certain times we need to look at identities as both having penalties and privileges. So because we used this tool, one of the things that happened was we were able to challenge this binary and realize that identities actually can be both. And it's very context dependent. And we also created a bunch of guidelines. We were curious about the guidelines, and we won't have a slide about it. But they had very practical steps that they came up with. So, for example, they wanted to write a petition to their board about this tool, basically, and say that we want to start using this tool, do some field work, do some interviews with households, and mark their identities on this tool and understand this better. So they wanted to change some bits of their practice so that they were able to go a little bit more and reflect a little bit about their practice. So there were a lot of other guidelines about how they communicate. I don't want to really get into those details too much because, yeah, I mean, maybe I can talk about it with you afterwards. But yeah, some results. So as I was telling you about the metaphor, so we basically, we asked ourselves the question, what do we mean when we say vulnerable household? So we question what vulnerability means. Yeah, we also identified, we said which identities of people might be excluding when we choose certain co-creation collaborative methods. So also how do they actually reach households and who does this exclude? How much attention are we paying to differences within the households and the community when we approach them with flexible solutions? So basically what I did was I had all of these metaphors up on the walls, and they would go from each metaphor, from one metaphor to the other, and come up with questions which they would ask and then we would discuss. So they are all related to one metaphor, and then for the last one, which inequalities stem from the current structure of the energy system we want to disrupt. So we basically had a lot of these discussions, and I sent them all of these discussions after the workshops. And then so here you can see the Web of Identities once again. And with this, I want to show you some of the things that they have said. So firstly, with this approach of really sitting in a room for 4 hours twice with other people that they closely work with, looking at a lot of philosophical perspectives like questioning knowledge, for example. They did get some fresh perspectives. I want to share that with you. They also identified some strengths of this approach, and they also identified some challenges. So I want to take you through that as well. So through this process, basically they were reminded of a lot of historical context. The UK is a very deeply unequal society. So we were able to talk about racism, about colonialism, and all of these important systems of oppression that have historically led to marginalization. it also enabled them to embrace the analysis of power. So we spoke a lot about like energy companies, we spoke a lot about the government, how they have a lot of social power in the system. Like for example, one of them said, I felt how omnipresent power is in everything I do. We also reflected about our own power as individuals within different organizations, of how we basically do and approach things. Yeah, and they also appreciated just having space to think about their work because they felt that they are like doing and not reflecting. So they really, really appreciated the space, even while working with justice, with inclusion. They appreciated the space to take a step back, think about broader issues of injustice, and think critically and together. And from the tool itself, as I was showing you, we were able to create a comprehensive visual representation of different identities.
So we have 10 minutes to close the session.
Oh, okay. Oh my God, I'm really overrun the time. Okay, thank you for the heads up. So yeah, I think from this slide, what I would like to highlight is we basically were able to critique a lot of our own practices. There's like lots of co-design methods that are happening that are already being used. We were able to question a lot of assumptions that we had that we make about households using this method. And I think the next step for them, like from now I've exited from the organization, and I think the next step for them is they're going to be basically using this this tool themselves. Yeah, I'm going to skip the strengths bit because I think I already spoke about it. I would like to talk about the challenges. Of course, as you can see, like the approach was very detailed, it was very qualitative, it was very reflective. They said that it was difficult for them to apply this in their context because it was mostly policy and business oriented work, which meant that there were some restrictions of what they could say or what they could do. As academics and also as activists, there's more space to think about radical things. There's more freedom to question certain power structures, which they felt they could talk about it within their own organizations and within their own teams, but they couldn't publicly take a stance. They felt that the approach was very valuable, but like applying these ideas in multidisciplinary teams, which they often work with, would be very, very difficult. And they also felt that there's a chance that even if they engage with all of these histories of oppression and place marginalized groups at the center of their policy recommendations, design recommendations, there might be another actor outside who's more powerful than them, who might water it down and say, actually, we don't need to go into so much detail about oppression. We can just do the bare minimum. And I think the political neutrality bit is kind of tied to what I was saying earlier about them thinking they don't have the same freedoms that we do as academics. I do have more slides, but I feel like I've really overrun time. So I think we have maybe 5 minutes. But I wanted to also really highlight this case, so I'm just going to take 2 minutes. I personally think we should also talk about intersectionality and just transitions in India. I'm going to skip this slide. I can send slides to you later if you're interested. But what I want to show you is some work that one of my colleagues has done, Uttara and some of our other colleagues who work for World Resources Institute. And they've been doing a lot of qualitative ethnographic research, similar to my research, workshops and interviews. I'm going to skip the slides on inequality in India. So they've been applying this to the world's second largest solar power park, which is in Karnataka in Pavadana. And it's called Shakti Sthala. And it's available online, so I really urge you to have a look. But what they found was, 13,000 acres of land basically leased from farmers. The farmers that did own land or small land were paid 21,500 rupees per annum per acre. In comparison to national statistics, which say on an average in India, farmers make 97,000 rupees per annum per acre. So there was an inherent price difference over there. Apart from this, there were also landless farmers. So there were agricultural laborers that lived there permanently. So there's already an injustice to farmers that own the land. But there also are farmers that are landless, which is work on the farms, and they've actually struggled the most because they lost their livelihoods the moment the company constructed the solar power plant. And less than 30% of them have been employed since the farm opened in 2017. So, and these are recent statistics. This is from 2023. And these landless farmers, they've basically been forcibly displaced because they haven't really found any other source of livelihood. So they're basically taking their sheep to other neighboring villages. And that this has resulted in some conflict with those places, like the neighboring villages, and most importantly, women who were employed. So 56% of both like land owning and landless women were employed before the solar park was installed, but none of them have been employed by the solar park. Whereas 30% of landless farmers actually did get a job in terms of maintaining and operation of the solar farms. So there's definitely that exclusion as well. So I guess like the message is that we have to really be context sensitive when it comes to just transitions, and we have to look at how there's intersectionality between the differences in the social fabric. So for example, here we saw land ownership, caste, gender, age, family size, etc. All of this need to be considered. So yeah, I'm sorry for taking so long, but that's all I have.